breaking news, we've got a final from Miami where it's roll tide. Alabama beats Ohio State 52-24 in the national championship, their first title since the 2017 season. And what a performance from their Heisman finalists and Heisman Trophy winner Devonta Smith. Record-setting night. Halftime, he had 12 catches for 215 yards, 3 touchdowns. Smith, however, left the game in the third quarter. The hand injury came out in the fourth with it taped up. Meantime, running back Najee Harris had 158 total yards, 3 total touchdowns. Mac Jones set a CFP title game record with 464 yards passing to go along with 5 touchdowns as Alabama overwhelms Ohio State 52-24, covering the spread of 9.5. Game goes over the total. Depending on where you got it, the game going over the total for the 6th straight national title game. And Alabama is a national champ once again as Nick Saban wins his 7th as a head coach, most ever. Let's get out live to Miami. Chris Hassel and Brady Quinn standing by.
Yeah, Hakeem, it seems like every other year we're standing here talking about an Alabama national championship because, well, that's what happens. 6 in 12 years for Nick Saban at Alabama, and it was a dominant performance tonight.
It was truly remarkable to see, in particular the offense, though, the way they really just continued to find ways of getting their biggest playmaker, Devonta Smith, open. Whether it was put him in cut splits, motioning him, putting him in stacks, moving him around where the Ohio State defense could never really get a beat on him. And even when Shaun Wade, this is what he wanted. This is what he talked about. He wanted that matchup one-on-one with Devonta Smith. When it came down to that, he couldn't stop. There's nothing they could do. So, really, it was the brilliance tonight of Devonta Smith, the best playmaker. Didn't even finish the game and still had a career high just in the first half. And then you look at Mac Jones, a career high in tonight's game. He was perfect with the exception of one mistake, the one fumble that gave Ohio State a little momentum there in the first half. Outside of that, he was lights out.
One of the few times that Ohio State was able to stop Alabama. It just seemed like Ohio State had to score a touchdown on every possession to keep up, and that just wasn't possible. Justin Fields wasn't the same quarterback in this game as he was 10 days ago against Clemson.
No, and he took a couple hits early, and you wonder if the ribs were impacted by that. It was kind of wincing. Didn't seem like he was overly comfortable. He also had a thumb injury at some point earlier this season, too, and it looked like the ball wasn't coming out of his hand very smooth. Maybe there was something going on with that as well, but when Trey Sermon went out early in the game, you knew that obviously their rushing attack was going to take a bit of a hit. He's a different back than Master Teague, who's a more physical downhill runner. Sermon's got a little more wiggle to him. He finished the season on a record pace. And so once they lost that, they started to lose that semblance of balance that we talked about in the pregame that was oh so important for Ohio State to keep.
Yeah, they had the COVID-19 issues. They didn't have their starting kicker, a starting defensive tackle, another starting defensive lineman. Yeah. How much do you think that played into this game? Of course, then losing their best offensive lineman during the game and their running back.
The Wyatt Davis and Trey Sermon injuries, I think, hurt them more so than Tommy Togiai not being there. You know, he's a great player, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like Alabama dominated on the ground. When Najee Harris was running the football, he was usually running through a few tackles and carrying some guys with him. I actually thought the front 7 for Ohio State played pretty well for the most part, especially in the first half. Even though Alabama was scoring, it was more about the passing attack and the inability of the secondary and the linebackers to be able to cover down and stop some of those big plays.
Let's go back to Devonta Smith because it was just such an incredible performance. We're used to seeing, Heisman moments. Heisman is a regular season award, so Heisman moments come during the season. But he had his best game, his best half after winning the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, and you think about all the different ways you're kind of pulled around. I've been to New York. I've been there for the award ceremonies, whether it was down in Orlando back when we actually didn't have to deal with COVID, and everyone would show up, and then you're going to Baltimore to receive the Johnny Unitas Award and going to the Maxwell Club, and you go on that award circuit. Sometimes you lose focus, sometimes you're not in your best shape, but it didn't look like anything was bothering him. I mean, after winning the Heisman Trophy, he only turned it up another level, another notch, almost like he had something to prove, like maybe he should be the first wide receiver taken in this upcoming year's draft.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people are asking right now because we see him in this building behind us, Hard Rock Stadium. The Miami Dolphins own the number 3 overall pick. Ryan Wilson in last week's mock draft had him going number 5 to Cincinnati. Does he slip that far?
I don't know. I mean, look, I think if we saw anything from last year's first round is wide receivers now are being looked at as a premium. You've got to find guys who can separate or go up and make plays, especially for your young quarterback. So it would make a lot of sense to pair him with a familiar quarterback or signal caller in Tua Tagovailoa. I think my only concern is there's a lot of competition. Jamar Chase, who was a fantastic wide receiver for LSU last year, who opted out this year, he looks like he could compete to be that number 1 wide receiver taken. And Jalen Waddle, I know he didn't have much of an impact in tonight's game. Toughed it out, tried to go out there. Obviously, the foot ankle is still bothering him, but he's a guy when he gets healthy. You turn on the tape, you watch that young man. Kind of reminds you a little bit of Tyreek Hill. So there's going to be a lot of competition for that first wide receiver taken. It could be Devonta Smith. I'm curious still to see what his 40 time is going to be in comparison to some of the other guys in this class.
And on Waddle, I mean, we had him out there in that first series, made that catch down in the red zone.
Right.
Hobbled off the field. We thought that was going to be it. He kept going.
I was shocked. I mean, again, you're talking about a guy who's a first-round talent. There's no doubt about it. We saw what Ruggs did in the 40, and then he won the first round last year. Waddle, if he does run, and again, I don't know how much time he'll need to really recover, so he is 100%. Who could be in the 4.2 range. And we're talking about blazing speed. As fast as Devonta Smith plays, I don't think he can even do that in the 40. So there will be some NFL scouts and general managers, decision makers ultimately, who are going to be wowed by that, and they may be looking for that speed over what we've just seen for Devonta Smith this season, which was truly remarkable.
There's so much to say wow about in this game for Alabama. You got all the playmakers. Mac Jones was nearly perfect. But how about Steve Sarkisian staying here for the championship game, not being distracted at all after taking the job at Texas, and just calling it a magnificent game?
You always wonder about that. You know, you're getting interviewed, and you've got all these negotiations, that thing going on off the field, and you're probably even recruiting to a degree for your future spot, and yet you've got a national championship game to prepare for. And you got the feeling that he was always a step ahead of the Ohio State defensive staff. It seemed like when they were bringing pressure, he was running a screen. When they got man-to-man, they had some plays or shots downfield, and it also seemed like they found ways of getting their playmakers the football, and they didn't allow anyone to really be eliminated, and basically dictated to the Ohio State defense what they wanted to do. Huge credit to Steve Sarkisian. He was masterful, in particular in the first half. Second half, they didn't have to do quite as much, but they still were dominant. And even with Smith out, you could still see some of the other playmakers step up and kind of fill in those roles.
We mentioned that Nick Saban wins a national championship for Alabama for the 6th time in 12 years. It's number 7 total when you add that one at LSU. Breaks the tie with Bear Bryant. That's the most all time. But how about Nick Saban at Alabama? When you go back to that 2009 team and those early 2010 teams, it was all about defense. Some of the best defenses we've ever seen. How is he able to make that switch to one of the best offenses we've ever seen?
I think it's been incredible where he identified the fact that, and really the transition that he was seeing, and it probably started early on when he saw Johnny Manziel come in with Texas A&M, and they started to put up a bunch of yards in production, beat them that year, and he's thinking to himself, I've got to start to adapt to this. I have to be open to bringing in some offensive minds who are going to adapt to this style of play of football. More spread, more up-tempo, more of that style and pacing of play. And then it's become now, you know, a destination where Bill O'Brien's rumored to be the next offensive coordinator to come replace Steve Sarkisian, right? We've seen Lane Kiffin come through the Nick Saban car wash, go get a head job at FAU. Now he's at Ole Miss. Brian Daboll, now with the Buffalo Bills, he's going to be a hot head coaching candidate at some point once their season ends. So it's now become a destination for a lot of offensive minds at both levels to come and be able to kind of clean themselves up, reinvent themselves, and then move on to become a head coach and maybe go back to the next level at the NFL. It's remarkable to see that decision that he made back in the mid-2000s of how he wanted to transition, get away from that old school style, 3 yards in a cloud of dust in defense, and open up things on offense. And that's what good coaches do. They're flexible. They see the change before it's coming.
Before we send it back to the studio for more reaction on Alabama's 6th title in 12 years, I want to get your take, now that we've reached the finish line of this season, that we weren't sure was going to happen. And you still had conferences like the Big Ten, the Pac-12, that didn't play that many games, but we still made it. When you look back on this season, how are you going to remember it?
There's so many memories. You know, look, as a Notre Dame alum, I couldn't have been any more proud than watching Notre Dame knock off the #1 team in the country in Clemson earlier this year. That was just a great moment, I think, for the program and everyone else. But you saw in that moment, you know, talking COVID aside, just the amount of joy that the fans had in rushing the field, what football means to people. And it's been a tough year, but all credit to the coaches and players for the way they've conducted themselves, the protocols, the way they had to handle even their personal lives, you know, staying away from family, friends, and loved ones. The sacrifice that they made this year was the ultimate in order just to have a chance to play. And so all the credit goes out to all the players and people who made this possible, because without that, we wouldn't be standing here right now.
I remember asking you, I think it was sometime in July, are we going to have college football this season? You said 100%. I didn't buy it for several weeks after that, but you ended up being right, and thank God for that. College football is where it's at, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama is where the national championship is at once again. For Brady Quinn, I'm Chris Hassel. We send it back to you guys in the studio.
Chris, Brady, great stuff. Great work out there in Miami. Here's a look at the odds to win the 2021 CFP National Championship. No surprise, Alabama the favorite right now, plus 300, followed by Clemson at plus 400. Of course, they'll have DJ Uiagalelei running the offense there. Ohio State, Oklahoma follow at plus 750. And here's a look at Dennis Dodd's way too early top 10. Big game Dennis Dodd. He's got Clemson, number 1. Oklahoma, as we mentioned, number 2 here. Spencer Rattler leads that offense. Georgia's got JT Daniels. Alabama, Bryce Young. Ohio State's going to have a couple guys in the mix. C.J. Stroud, Jack Miller, and Kyle McCord all in the mix as we take a look at Dennis Dodd's way too early top 10. Never too early to take a look at this, but right now Clemson will go into the season as number 1 according to our big game Dennis Dodd. Much more ahead as we break down the national championship from all angles. Devonta Smith and the Tide roll their way to another national title. Keep it locked. You're watching CBS Sports HQ.
Back on CBS Sports HQ, where it's roll, Tide, roll. Alabama winning the national title game, going away 52-24. That makes it big wins in the college football playoff, both in the semifinals, 17 points over Notre Dame, 28 points here in the national title game. They did it on the shoulders of Mac Jones, 36 of 45, 464 through the air, 5 touchdown passes. Devonta Smith really only playing a half in this one after injuring his finger early in the second half, but still goes 12 receptions, 200-plus yards receiving, and 3 receiving touchdowns.
Welcome in our team of experts. 2-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden and CBS Sports HQ college football analyst Barrett Sallee and Chip Patterson. B-Mac, we sat here and watched every Alabama game, and I know we weren't together this season, but we watched it in lockstep. This game really a representation of what Alabama did each and every week, and Alabama just overwhelms Ohio State in the end.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think or say that Alabama had more talent than Ohio State, but it clearly looked that way tonight. They were well prepared, they executed, and they seemed faster than Ohio State. And that's so weird to say because we know the team speed that Ohio State has, right? Historically speaking, they've always had fast guys on both sides of the football, but tonight it looked like they were running in quicksand. They could not keep up with the skilled players on both sides of the football, especially the offensive guys from Alabama. And their wide receivers just couldn't create any separation from the defenders, the guys in the secondary for Alabama as well. So this just was a total dominating performance for Alabama. But this has been the storyline for the Crimson Tide. It doesn't matter who they're playing. They dominated every opposing team they faced. And it has a lot to do with the structure that they have in place. And Nick Saban has a funny way of getting all his kids to always be focused and dialed in. You know, they never overlook an opponent. They never take an opportunity for granted. They are dialed in and week out. And that's just what we saw tonight. A dialed in a team that was clearly focused, and they played hard for 4 quarters, and they just had more talent.
And I think with that focus and that dominance, sometimes it's lost that this was the reinvention of a football program. So often we thought of the Crimson Tide as this bang 'em up, beat 'em down sort of team that goes defense first. And this year it is an offensive onslaught, getting near 50 points per game with ease. Chip Patterson, when you think of what this Alabama team was able to do in that reinvention, what does that tell you about this program and where they're at the forefront of college football right now?
When the greatest coach in college football history has embraced innovation, it's a wrap. Like, go ahead and seal it up. There are other teams will win games and other teams will win national championships, but of Nick Saban's Alabama national champions, this is only the second one to be undefeated. This is one of the greatest teams that Nick Saban has ever had, and it comes after losing Tua Tagovailoa, after losing Jerry Jeudy, and after losing Henry Ruggs. I mean, the big question was, what are they going to do offensively after losing 3 first-round picks to the NFL draft on the offensive side of the ball. Was this all a Tua experiment? Was this, Lane Kiffin put it in motion? Can Steve Sarkisian keep this going? It is positive marks for Sark. It is so much praise for Mac Jones, a player who as a high school prospect back in 2015 had to ask for a profile to be put together for him because he was so overlooked at the time. Najee Harris, who could have been in the NFL and played like a pro for most of the season, he comes back for his senior season. Devonta Smith, who brought the last Alabama championship back with that win against Georgia, catching the touchdown pass from Tua. I just think that this is really showing you that Alabama, with its ability to constantly reinvent itself through NFL draft exits and through assistant coach exits, the one person that we have to focus on is that short man at the top, because he is the absolute best that this sport has ever seen.
Indeed, he is. Now 7 national titles, most ever by a head coach, as he passes fellow Alabama coaching legend Bear Bryant. Barrett, you voted for Devonta Smith to win the Heisman Trophy, and the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners have absolutely balled out in the national title game. Joe Burrow, now Devonta Smith. At halftime, it was 12 catches for 215 yards, 3 TDs. Didn't play again, got injured in the third quarter. But what you saw from Devonta Smith was also representative of his season, that he was the best player in college football this year.
Yeah, he really was. I mean, it was one of the most stellar first halves of football that I think we've ever seen. And certainly in terms of championship game lore, it's going to go down in history. And look, this is what he does best. You saw him in space. I mean, it's like a video game. You know, he even when he's covered, even when you think you have an angle on him, he gets around you. And I think that's indicative of his ability in space. That's a big reason why he was so successful. Teams were so scared of Devonta Smith getting behind them that they played soft. And that's what Ohio State did. And they said, look, Devonta, you're going to beat us on catch and runs. And he did early. And then so later on in the game, in the first half, Steve Sarkisian finds a way to get tough Borland on him, and they go over the top. You know, he did everything in this game that he did all year. It was all wrapped up in one nice little package, and he showed his arsenal. And, you know, Brady and Chris said it just last segment. He might be playing his games in Hard Rock Stadium with the Dolphins. I mean, this guy, you know, they call him the Slim Reaper for a reason. And it's because he can kill you in so many different ways. And he showed that against an Ohio State defense that, look, I know we're going to sit back and say, oh, they gave up half 100. They gave up a 50 burger. They're not that good. Let me tell you about some of those athletes they have. They're really, really good and really fast. And Devonta Smith, he was in a different gear. I mean, it's like a video game out there. It's unbelievable.
Devonta Smith happens to be a football player that plays the wide receiver position. And he continues to display that mindset. I mean, he is a football player. And you look at some of the prolific wide receivers that have come through Alabama over the last few years that have went on to be high drafted players. I think he's the best. I think he's the best. I don't even think it's close. I mean, the road that he went through this season, playing every ball game against an SEC opponent, and then losing their most explosive playmaker offensively in Jalen Waddle. And the offense production just increased specifically because of Devonta, and all the defensive teams they faced against knew they had to find a way to stop him, and they could not do so. I mean, he's just a dominating player. When I watch him, he reminds me of 2 wide receivers, both guys that I played against in the National Football League. Number 1, Marvin Harrison, because of his route running. You look at how fluid he is when he's running his routes, his ability to be a sure-handed pass catcher and creating separation. And number 2, Deshaun Jackson, with the speed and how smooth he is when he's in his routes. It's like he's not running fast, but he's running fast. I have yet to see anybody catch him with an angle. I've yet to see anybody stay in his hip pocket when he's running a go ball. I mean, he is a very, very fast guy, but it's sneaky fast because he doesn't look like he's moving that fast because he's a smooth runner. The sky's the limit for him, and I'm not a Miami Dolphin fan, but just seeing him do damage in that stadium, listen, I would not have a problem if the Miami Dolphins decide to take Devonta Smith with the 3rd overall selection, because he's a football player, he's a great kid, he's a high character kid, and I think he would fit in nicely down there in Miami.
It doesn't even matter if he even plays a single game in the NFL. I think he'll play many games in the NFL. I think he'll be a Pro Bowler, but he is a legend in college football. I mean, it's that simple, right? That is what we do for our Heisman Trophy winners, and especially the ones who really stand out. And when you are the first wide receiver since Desmond Howard in 1991, when you are the first non-quarterback in a run of quarterbacks, you're adding yourself to a Derrick Henry and a Mark Ingram and a Reggie Bush. You are college football glory forever. When you set these SEC records, when you show out like this, when you are the offensive MVP in a game where you didn't log a catch after halftime, you are a legend. And for it to be someone who, coming out of last season, you would argue he was maybe the third or fourth wide receiver in that wide receiver room. And coming into this season, you were thinking, yeah, he's going to be pretty good. You know, we've seen him show out from time to time. He has consistently exceeded the expectations, proven whatever doubters that are out there completely wrong, and really emerged as legendary status here in college football. It's an exciting thing. I wish him a speedy recovery from this injury. But again, your offensive MVP, you didn't log a reception after halftime. Come on, man. That's legendary.
That is.
It was fantastic stuff. And guys, I'm never going to be the one to call curfew on a good party, and we're celebrating right now, but we do have to be consistent about the way that we're talking about things, because on the tail end of that semifinal game in which Alabama takes care of Notre Dame, beats them by 17 points, everybody's sick and tired of Notre Dame. Now we see a 28-point victory in the national title game over an Ohio State team that did away with a Clemson team. So you're looking at Alabama through the lens of 2 through 4. Chip, I'm going to go to you first here with kind of a big picture question. Is there a competition problem right now in college football?
No, there's always been a competition problem. I don't think it's a right now issue. The haves and have-nots only gets further exposed when we get more of these matchups between teams that all consider themselves national championship contenders. Because in the BCS era, we had blowouts. I mean, we saw a USC team back in 2004 put 55 on the board in a game that really wasn't all that competitive. We have seen games in the national championship game that haven't been all that competitive. I really believe that this is special. And I understand that we're prisoners of the moment, but if we're going to come out of 2019 talking about Joe Burrow and LSU like they were one of the greatest college football teams of all time, I think that we've got to talk about the 2020 Alabama Crimson Tide as one of the greatest college football teams of all time. They were utterly dominant against everyone they played. Their first punch was excellent, and they never let up. The wire-to-wire nature that they won football games was the kind of dominance that they talk about around Tuscaloosa in that building when they talk about eliminating the opponent's will to compete. It is psychological, it is physical, it happens at all levels, and I think the Crimson Tide this year have done it better than most Crimson Tide teams and most college football teams, at least of my lifetime.
America loves juggernauts. America loves the big guy. Was there a competition problem when the Yankees were a dynasty? No. Is there a competition problem when the Bulls are a dynasty? No. Is there a competition problem when the Warriors were doing their thing? No. Is there a competition problem when the Patriots were doing their thing? No. It makes the sport great. When you have that big guy, when you have Goliath, it makes everything else interesting. I absolutely despise the fact that college football gets penalized and gets criticized for having really good football teams. The point is to reward the best team every year, and it's not just Alabama. We've had Clemson, we've had LSU, we've had Florida State. Go back to the 2000s, and you had Florida, you had USC. There's no competition problem. It just happens to be right now that there are 2 or 3 really good teams every single year. And you can't even say that about the other sports most of the time, because usually it's just the Patriots, or it's just the Yankees dynasty, or it's just the Bulls with Michael Jordan. So no, there's not a competition problem. In fact, having Goliath out there, whether it's Alabama, whether it's Clemson, whether it's anybody else, that's a feature, that's not a bug.
I think we brought the Goliath out of Barrett there for a moment. That was good stuff.
Remember, though, David took down Goliath, all right? I want to remind you that.
Eventually he does.
Got hit by a smooth, flat rock. He was dead.
A while.
Okay?
To put it,
cut off his head.
to put
Served it on a platter. Look it up in the Bible. B-Mac, I want to ask you a competition question here because we'll sit here and play these hypotheticals, and Mac Jones actually outdueled Joe Burrow in terms of national title games, 464 passing yards. That's a record in CFP title. He matched him in touchdown passes with 5. Would the 2019 LSU national champions beat the 2020 Alabama national champions? Yeah.
That's a good question.
Our 1,000 simulation show. No.
You know what? For me, guys, I might be a prisoner of the moment, but I think I would side with Alabama because their defense this year, they were better than LSU's defense last year. And then you look at the road to glory, right, for Alabama this year, not even considering the COVID issues and all the hurdles dealing with the pandemic, right? You look at what they had to go through. Remember, their entire season, their entire schedule was all SEC teams, right? The toughest football conference in college football, all SEC opponents, right? So they beat 6 ranked teams, 5 top 15 teams, 3 top 5 teams overall, and they beat all of those opponents convincingly, right? I mean, maybe you can say the SEC game was kind of a nail-biter, but remember, they dominated that ball game. And then I forgot about Mississippi early in the year. They were going back and forth. But for the most part, they just dominated everybody. And then they came into tonight's game, Hakeem, you mentioned, it was the largest point spread in a championship game. 9 points. It was easy. They covered that with ease. Remember, in halftime, the spread went up to 24.5 against a really good Ohio State team with a lot of professional players on it. So to answer your question, I love what LSU was able to do last year, but this Alabama team, Joe Burrow was unbelievable. Joe Cool is what I called him last year. But Mac Jones was probably the most efficient quarterback I've ever seen play college football this season. And each week he was consistent and he displayed that efficiency week in and week out. So the road to glory was more difficult for Alabama. They went through that smooth sailing. Their defense, in my opinion, was better than LSU's defense last year. And because of how efficient Mac Jones was, along with the Heisman winner being a wide receiver, and don't forget they had 2 other guys that were up for the award as well, I take the Crimson Tide.
2020 Alabama, 2019 LSU. I'm going to say the spread is Alabama minus 3.5. The over/under 89.5, probably between the two of them.
Too many daggone points.
Play it over.
Too many daggone points, Chip.
We're going under. We're going to take Alabama. We're going under. And my deal breaker, honestly, 5 first-team All-Americans. We talk about Devonta Smith, Najee Harris, Mac Jones. How about Landon Dickerson, first-team All-American center? Alex Leatherwood, first-team All-American left tackle. Like half of your first-team offense for the whole country. This isn't just SEC. Half of your first-team All-American offense is Alabama players. Throw in Patrick Surtain for a clean half dozen for the Crimson Tide. I will take Alabama in that simulation minus the 3.5. And as he said, too many daggone points. I'll take under 89.5.
All right, get this. Most national championships past 12 years, Alabama 6, every other FBS school 6. That just puts it into perspective as Nick Saban wins his 7th national title, passing fellow Alabama coaching legend Bear Bryant. When you take a look at Nick Saban's career, Barrett, what does a 7th national championship mean for him?
It further solidifies Nick Saban as the greatest coach of all time. And look, he really didn't need this win to claim that title, to have the kind of record that he has had in college football in this day and age with 85 scholarship limits, with so much competition in the SEC, with more of an increased focus in college football around the country, with more recruiting battles than you'd ever thought you'd imagine. He was already ahead of Bear Bryant in my eyes, but this win, if there were any doubters out there, this win solidifies it, because you look at what this season was, to go undefeated in a COVID year with 10 SEC regular season games with so much uncertainty. People forget, not only did Nick Saban have COVID, Nick Saban did not coach for 3 practices before the Georgia game because he thought he had COVID, because there was a false test. So Nick Saban has proven time and time again that he can recruit at a high level, that he can coach at a high level, and I think most importantly, he identifies his coaches to hire ahead of when everybody else is. He didn't have to hire Lane Kiffin in 2014. He was very anti-dynamic offense, but he recognized what football was going to be. So he doesn't just do it his way, he redefines what his way is on an annual basis. And as a result, he's the best coach in college football history. And he didn't even need this win to prove it.
Well, now he's officially a great coach, Barrett, because under Nick Saban, Alabama had been 0-4 against the spread in the CFP National Championship. He finally covers. Finally, that could go up on his mantle with the 7 national titles.
Go ahead, cash a ticket, Coach. Guys, it is not lost on me how lucky I am always to sit here, talk about the game we love, and that's a privilege we almost did not have this year. Taking a look back at the season that was, Chip, I'll go your way first here. Is there a lasting image, a way that you will remember this and stored away in your head, this crazy season that was in college football?
Okay, the funny image first, which is Nick Saban when the daggum headphones don't work after the college football playoff semifinal. He's standing socially distanced from his interview. And he's just sitting here. He's giving you one of these. He doesn't understand why it doesn't work. But when I think about like a real image on the field, something that stands out to me, it has to be the relationship that we saw from Mac Jones and Devonta Smith. We saw their connection on the field to record-setting completion percentage for Mac Jones, record-setting receiving for Devonta Smith, a Heisman Trophy win for Devonta Smith, and then it all comes together during that Heisman Trophy ceremony where the real love between those teammates is put on full display. It is not just having teammates there as Heisman Trophy finalists, but really 2 players who exceeded expectations in every way, shape, and form. I think it represents the way that they battled together, the way they committed to this season, and also it happens to be the national champions. And so the relationship on and off the field between Mac Jones and Devonta Smith, that's probably going to be my lasting image right now.
I think my lasting image would be, in totality, college football in a whole, as a whole, right? Looking at the uncertainty coming into the season and then remembering the first weekend of college football and then seeing the SEC conferences start later and, of course, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, just the dedication that the players had to devote, for themselves, the coaching staff. This was a extremely tough mental process for all parties that were involved. But just being able to get through the season and finally see a championship game that was entertaining and was competitive to some degree, I applaud everybody that was involved in making this season a success, because clearly, I know for those players, once being a student athlete and knowing how hard it is, just going through a normal season, but going through something that wasn't normal took a lot out of you. But being able to get to this point, bowl season, playoffs, and now championship game, I applaud everybody that was involved.
Yeah, especially the trainers for going through what they've had to go through to figure out how to do this responsibly on the fly without any blueprint. I mean, this is a pandemic we've never seen. We've never had to try to figure out how to test an entire football team 3 times a week and go through all the contact tracing and everything. It's just everybody involved deserves a round of applause. Certainly the players for sacrificing, the medical staff as well. But honestly, the lasting memory for me are Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence for the "We Want to Play" movement, for "Let Us Play," for speaking up for themselves, for not letting other people who may not know the details and the intricacies of a player's day-to-day life speak for them. It's crazy to think that there are a lot of people, including people in our business, that think they know what's best for young men. Well, you know what? College football players enjoy playing college football. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields started that. They are the ones that really got the season going. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be talking about this national championship game in mid-January. So my lasting image is players having a voice, players coming together, and players not letting other people speak for them when they know what's best for them.
Barrett, Chip, BMAC, fist bump, elbow, whatever you want to do here. It was a privilege all season, work with you guys every week, week in and week out, delivering awesome content, both from an analytical standpoint to gambling. You guys were on point every week. Great job as always. These are some of the best in the business. And hey, you want more from these guys, check out BMAC on his podcast, All Things Covered, joined by Cardinals corner Patrick Peterson, their latest guest, former Steelers safety Ryan Clark. Join Chip and his crew on the Cover 3 podcast. There is no offseason in college football. They'll keep you updated on the comings and goings around the country. All Things Covered and the Cover 3 podcast. Download and subscribe today.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.